So you've just gotten into Commander and you keep hearing about power level. You may have even been asked, hey man, what's your deck's power level? And that is a highly subjective and ambiguous question that means many things to many people. So how do you respond? Hey everybody, Jason Com here, and today we're breaking down what power level means in relation to your Commander deck. Generally speaking, the Commander community operates on a 1 to 10 scale, with 1 being the least powerful to 10 being the most powerful. However, since these are the extremes of the scale, you'll probably fall somewhere in the middle, and the middle is very, very muddy. So let's start at the bottom and work our way up. Power level 1 is reserved for decks that are seemingly thrown together with no plans, strategy, synergy, or reasonable ability to win. These are highly unfocused decks of seemingly random cards and no structure. Oftentimes you'll see new players put together these types of decks when they inherit cards from a friend or family member and don't completely understand the game. They adhere to the color identity restriction of a commander deck but pay no attention to card draw, ramp, or average mana cost. While these decks can still be fun to play for new players, you will likely never meet another power level 1 commander deck in the wild, meaning you will lose a lot of games and probably just play lands every turn. Hopefully. Moving up a notch to power level 2, you'll find decks with at least some synergy and often a heavy reliance on the commander being in play. These decks still have a very poor mana base, meaning it is not color balanced properly or are playing too many tapped lands, and still doesn't have the proper amount of card draw, ramp, or removal necessary to effectively play the game. My very first commander deck was a power level 2. Gerard, Golgari Lichlord. After being introduced to the game through Standard by my brother, I had purchased the Golgari Guild Kit and subsequently heard about Commander. I had a grand total of 5 ramp and card draw spells, 2 single target removal spells, and 1 board wipe, and a lot of expensive creatures. I did not understand the proper structure of a Commander deck and was just excited to play. This resulted in me losing every game against my friends and getting very, very salty. Then I just bought a precon. Hey, speaking of precons, let's just talk about power level 3. This is where you typically see decks become somewhat focused around 1 to 3 different strategies, the land base starts to improve slightly, and the structure of the decks begins to take shape, although inefficient. This is most likely where you will start playing Commander. Precons have been dropping with each set for a while now, and there are a ton of options to consider. While Wizards of the Coast does produce high-quality precons from time to time, most of them are treated as introductory products with 1 to 3 themes and some Commander staples to get you playing tonight. Now, power level 4 is not too different from 3, obviously, but the biggest difference here is often the higher quality precons or extremely budget homebrew decks. These decks start to have a more streamlined game plan and better ramp, card draw, and removal. All things are usually highly costed due to budgetary restraints, but at least they often contain a win condition or 2. Now, you are very likely as a new player to end up at power level 3 or 4, and I highly recommend you purchase a precon. Always buy the deck that interests you the most, but if you can buy precons with better ramp, draw, removal, I would highly recommend that. Ask an experienced friend for advice, or simply go down to your local game store and ask an employee for help. I say this because the first deck you purchase or build will not be your last, I promise you. Moving into power level 5, we start to get into more tuned decks. Now, most of the decks you'll see at power level 5 are upgraded precons or budget homebrew decks. You'll see a broad strategy involved with a lot of commander staples in the card draw, ramp, and removal slots. Power level 5 is where I live. I absolutely love building decks in this power level because I enjoy playing cards that interest me over cards that are more efficient. We call these pet cards in the Commander community, and when I build decks, I'm often employing a budget, which means I don't play cards like Rhystic Study or Smothering Tide. I play Fact or Fiction and Return of the Wild Speaker, because that's how I roll. Once I build a deck at this level and play it a few times, I often notice some duds or new cards that come out that I want to slot in, and I'll begin upgrading the deck a few cards at a time. This leads us to power level 6. These decks have a defined strategy, good draw, ramp, and removal options, and also prioritize untapped lands for the mana base. Oftentimes, these decks have a clear win condition with a couple backup plans and start to win around turns 10 or 12. These types of decks will still have a relative budget in mind, but this is where you start to see some higher end staples being employed. A lot of my decks are power level 6. As you become a more adept deck builder, this is likely where you will live, especially if budget is a concern. While I really enjoy staying in the power level 5 or 6 range for my commander decks, which allows me to play at nearly every commander table, every now and then I'll find a deck that I really enjoy and I'll start to upgrade it over time. My best example of this is my Tuvasa the Sunlit deck. I bought the Adaptive Enchantment Precon a few years ago, switched to Vasa for the Commander, and slowly upgraded each slot of that deck ever since. It hardly resembles the Precon now, but it is so much fun to play. This is how I recommend you purchase and build Commander decks. Buy a precon you like, identify the commander strategy you enjoy, and then slowly upgrade the deck over time. Eventually, you'll probably end up with a power level 7 or 8 commander deck, which is where a lot of commander players at local game stores like to play. Speaking of power level 7, these decks are becoming very optimized. That means you have the best or next best cards for your strategy, you have very efficient card draw, ramp, and removal, and you have a very refined strategy utilizing a lot of the power staples and low-cost tutors in the format. I really think this is the sweet spot for commander decks. You aren't so optimized that you'll beat the power level 3 or 6 every game, but the consistency of your deck and the impact of the individual cards will often make you the arch enemy. Don't worry, we'll talk about the arch enemy in another episode, but this can be a very flexible spot to be. This is where most of my decks top out, as this is probably the highest power level deck you can play and still use the word budget. Since I'm a microbiologist and not a doctor, I am budget as hell. And if I were to really increase the power level of my decks past 7, I would likely price myself out of my playgroup's power level. Please don't be that guy that brings a power level 8 plus commander deck to a power level 5 or 6 game. You might have fun, but they will hate you and they'll never want to play with you again. Anyways, if you enjoy playing in higher power groups and staying just outside the CEDH level of play, then power level 8 is where you will top out. This is where you'll see budget decks disappear, and every slot of the deck, whether it be card draw, ramp, removal, or lands, will be top tier, highly efficient, and expensive. Think of the Mana Crypts and Force of Wills of the world. These decks are highly optimized with very defined styles of play and win conditions. You often see multiple combos in these decks, and every card contributes to the overall strategy. This is as close to CDH as you can get without your friends getting mad at you. Longtime Magic players with wide collections often have a deck or two at this level, and they are extremely fun to play. Now this is where we start to get into competitive gameplay. This is where the focus shifts from a social game where the main objective is to have fun and just be laid back to I want to win as fast as possible. Although that can still be really fun, power level 9 decks often have no budget and absolutely no fat. Every card is highly efficient and impactful, and you are playing numerous spells as soon as turn 1. These decks often combo off by turn 3 or 4 and pack an insane amount of interaction. CEDH is basically its own format where that meta relies on a different style of play and overall deck building structure. Board states are often a little less important and winning is king. Now, the only thing that really separates power level 9 decks from power level 10 is choosing a tier 2 commander instead of a tier 1 commander. These are the most powerful decks in the format, highly efficient, and the absolute best in slot cards in the game. Instant speed interaction is king, and these decks have the ability to win on turn 1 to 3 consistently. Don't blink because the game might already be over. That's it, guys. We talked about the varying power levels of commander decks and where you'll likely end up along the way. I enjoy playing in the power level 5 to 7 range personally, but wherever you and your playgroup end up is up to you. In the next video, we'll be talking about Rule 0, where a lot of discussions of power level comes up and how you can navigate that discussion without ruffling feathers. Until then, this is the Commander signing off.